Hello, Virginia.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, this new hybrid thing. Yes.
There is a question in the chat.
Yes.
I think
There's...
Virginia, she can see it herself.
Yes. So
and
there's...
the rest of you, I usually can shout very loudly, so I will do that. The question is, well, it's a compliment, really interesting presentation. When discussing responsible AI, which societal factors do you see as essential but currently not sufficiently active?
Okay, I see it. Yeah. Good question. Yes, I think actually the ones who really need to be active and are very little active are the AI researchers, the AI developers. We tend to like to, maybe by design, we tend to like to stay in our own offices, in our own corners, and focusing on developing systems because we can develop them. We are engineers in a sense, so developing it's what we like. But I don't see sufficiently participation in the discussion of the AI researchers, the computer scientists, which developed these systems, and that also is quite bad because of the lack of understanding what AI is and what AI systems can do and cannot do. Often the discussions at eye level go into very wild understandings of what AI is, what I refer to as this magical type of system. So I think that really I would appeal for computer scientists, for the AI developers to be more involved in the discussion.
So perhaps I have a kind of a question on that as well, a reflection on.
Yeah.
So I think that one of the things that would actually matter as well is the kind of the exactly at what you said, Virginia. So it is about understanding the system, and there's one part of understanding that is essential is that even if the technology would be totally perfect, it does not tell us how it will interact with the society.
Yeah.
So that is a very important question in most of the things that we find AI to be, for example, having this echo chamber effect, that where the society is reacting in a bad way to the system. And it cannot be found out if you don't make good pilots or sandboxes where the system actually starts reacting to the society, and you make the kind of studies to that in order to get. And these have not progressed, to my opinions, in a level that we would really actually start making the understanding of the combination of the AI and the society and how the interaction would go. It requires very multidisciplinary kind of things.
I fully agree with that. There is very little connection between the developing of the systems and the understanding the impact of the system in society, and trying out. Not everything is correct at the first time, and if we don't try out in safe and in sandboxes, like Leo indicates, if we don't try it out in these safe environments which we can control, we will not know what the systems will do in the real. So also in other technologies, we do try things in the lab first, and in AI that link is sometimes missing.
So yes, so simply it's about clinical trials.
Exactly.
You know, as a kind of a medicine people, that it really, you have to go to the field in order to figure out that.
Exactly, and we have to accept that these clinical trials not always succeed, and we accept that in medicine or in the biological research. But in AI, we expect that somehow the systems that are developed can be put to operation and commercialized straight from the drawing the table without really going through these trials. And that is really a very important issue that really needs to be much more addressed also in the regulations and in other operationalization options for implementing responsibility and trustworthy AI.
Okay, so we have one question we have 3 quick questions from the auditorium and 1 online. So I think I'll give the question to you first, and then.
Thank you very much, and sorry for making you walking up all these staircases. My name is Jakob Hjelmborg. I come from the Department of Biostatistics and Epidemiology, and thanks to all of you for very nice presentations this morning. I have just a very brief question. Since we're talking about ethics and AI, I mean, that's the main theme. Do you experts have sort of a priority? What should we teach the students, the medical students, in terms of ethics and AI? What would be your sort of top priority? You heard about the fairness principle, but can you somehow elaborate on this? Say that we can manage all the sort of modeling parts. I mean, we can tell them maybe what kind of modeling is going on here. We can also go a little bit beyond, going into what Virginia was mentioning about, saying having an AI system that may sort of have very good sort of generalizable properties and so on, all these things. But how about the ethics? How about the patient and AI and so on? How about the doctorate? How about the researchers? Can you give us a clue to that?
Sorry, can I go first on this? Yeah. Actually, I think in terms of who should be involved in developing responsible AI, I think one thing is to look at the people already working as researchers and so on, but I think one place to actually make a big effort is when we educate students. And this will not just be medical students, because most students will be in disciplines where digitalization will make a difference, and AI also. But I think in terms of sort of a list of topics for ethics of AI in medicine, I think just to be quick, I think definitely the things I mentioned are important to consider, of course. But I think I teach ethics and philosophy of science for quite a few students at the science faculty in Copenhagen. And there's a big push now to try to make sure that these sorts of topics are covered broadly. But I think the one thing is the sort of issues I mentioned, generally the value latentness of the systems that you develop and the sort of decisions that they will reflect. I also think that there is an element that's important to understand them, which is more like a sort of a philosophy of science issue, like the use of predictions to make decisions and statistical evidence as the foundation or warrant of making decisions about individuals. I think there are some important issues there which are relevant to appreciate. So for instance, the fact that these systems are sort of induction machines, they use the fact that history has been like this to predict things about the future, is sort of an old philosophical issue, which I think is quite relevant to know about in the context of these machines, because they might go terribly wrong all of a sudden when there are changes in society or whatever that suddenly makes it difficult to predict on the basis of the past. Right? There's a great case from Google. They developed an algorithm to predict the flu pandemics in the US on the basis of search terms. That's a pure correlation, right? And it worked well for a couple of years, and then suddenly it didn't work well at all. And it turned out that the correlations it had spotted, I can't recall it exactly, but it had something to do with the baseball season or basketball season or whatever search terms related to that. And then winter came earlier, and then something completely went wrong, right? So if you rely a lot on these sorts of systems, you are relying on a certain kind of knowledge base, if it's knowledge at all. It has challenges. Yeah, sorry, that's it for me.
Yeah, if I may follow up on that, I fully agree. And indeed, one of the issues that I agree that it's important to teach ethics and philosophy of science to all students at all disciplines, not only on the medical students, but also the computer scientists, but across all the different disciplines. Not only teaching it as a separate course, but really using and including the issue of ethical reasoning or ethics into also projects and making them aware that it's something which is integral part of the development and the application of this type of systems. It's also important to realize that it's not about designing systems that give the ethical answer in all kinds of situations, but it's about realizing that ethical answers are contextual and dependent also on the type of ethical theory that you use. You might get to a completely different interpretation of the situation, and we see that from the history of ethics, from the many different ethical schools that exist, that the motivations and the reasonings are completely different. So we need to understand that there is much more to ethics than just ensuring that the AI system gives you the right answer in all situations, which is probably not possible. It's what also Leo was referring as these clinical trials, and also realizing that it's not about the solution. It's about understanding that there is this multitude of factors that affect and influence the decisions that we make, and that it's not just what this inductive data-driven induction cannot replace the scientific method in all cases. So it's a complex issue, but I think that there are many, it needs to be addressed at many different levels in education.
Yeah, I think that these are very good answers. So I would actually add one aspect that is about the process of making ethical design. So how do you actually practically make, and it has a certain phases like anticipation. This is about figuring out if your solution, so it is a good solution for the use cases you are after. And also the question of something which is called affordances. These are kind of easy use cases for some other purposes. So now when you make an AI system, it may be actually a wonderful solution for your problem in a sense, but somehow it may also be a kind of a tool to misuse it in some horrible way. So this is a kind of it's not about technology itself in a way, it's about use of the technology and how easy it is to be used in a wrong way or not. So this is the anticipation part that you had to figure out. You could think about the same in drug development. You could think about building an opioid, which is very good for pain kind of pain relief, but it also may be, when it goes to black markets, it could be too easy to produce so that it would actually cause a huge societal problem when it is on the market. So this is a type of an idea where you have to figure out what you are in your hands, what are the consequences, and what are the unintended consequences that would be on your on delivery of products, something like that. It's also about inclusiveness. It's also figuring out what are the stakeholders that you take in your design in a way. Understand if you build something AI, how does it actually kind of influence the people who are doing the job? How you actually put this kind of figures out how the process of doing things is going to change with something that you include in the system. That is also important. Then it's about reflections. It's about reflectiveness in a way to figure out what assumptions you have made in your solution. Do you make some assumptions, for example, how men are behaving or women are behaving, or do you make some assumption that this problem is solvable with this set of data that I have in my hands or not? So what do you assume in the first place? Are those assumptions really something that you can trust on? And finally, if you have discussed with people with inclusiveness, then you look at this responsiveness of the system, that you listen to the to the surroundings, you listen to the stakeholders, and you actually introduce changes to your system that would actually help it. So
thanks.
That would be my go with this process, and then you're actually pretty fine.
Thanks. I'll stay up here for a few minutes. We have one more question here, and then I have 3 more here, but we also have some online. So please ask your.
Thank you very much. This is Oke Kärkkäinen speaking from the Department of Nuclear Medicine here at the Odense University Hospital. I have a question and comment to Sune, actually. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. Regarding the example of the diabetic retinopathy, I think the purpose must be some kind of a gatekeeping function. So in terms of false positives, false negatives, I guess you would accept a few false positives, but you would like to prohibit false negatives because those are going to be blind. So I guess you talked in terms of boundaries, you would push the boundary low, I guess. My question relates to the fact that actually that passed the hurdle of the FDA is some kind of impressive to all those who've been part of the clinical development in pharmaceutical industry. And there, when you have new medicines, you also have these post-marketing studies like phase 4 studies. So my question to you would be, do you know anything about whether there's more information of how well the propositions or the proposals of the algorithm were? So is there some kind of follow-up data? So after the algorithm proposed, send this one over to the doctor and this one not?
Not that I'm aware of, but I haven't looked into it, to be honest. But what I did notice was that the way that it has been approved by the FDA is through a new and novel pipeline, right? So it's not the usual system that they have used. I can't maybe something called novel technology. They had sort of set up a new way of approving these sorts of system, which I think in some ways made it easier, perhaps. But I haven't looked at the sort of follow-up since 2018. No, sorry.
We have at least 2 more questions on the floor, but I wanted to read the one online so we don't discriminate against our virtual participants here. So we have one that's posed to the whole panel. Dear panel, do we require things from AI algorithms in terms of explainability that we would not require from a human in a similar situation? So I thought if you could perhaps all speak very briefly in order to give time to our additional questions.
I can take the first trial on that. Sometimes when you do the deep learning research on, for example, figuring out cancer from X-ray images, then some doctors have done it for 20 or 30 years. They actually have a feeling about when there's a cancer or not. They cannot explain why they do it. The good part about there is this kind of dark knowledge that is coming from when you have a profession that you continue for a long time. Now with deep learning, you can actually copy that. You can make it perhaps explainable by being able to copy from the behavior of these people, how they do the stuff. So I would actually turn that question a little kind of the other way around. Of course, people cannot really say about how they do decisions. They may invent explanations, and that can AI do as well. But one could really go after that in such a way. So this was my short answer. So perhaps I won't go.
I would comment on the similar situation. I don't think that the AI algorithm and the person are in a similar situation, and therefore we do need to look at it differently. And I fully agree with the Leo in who emphasized that this the medical doctor has 20 years of experience. It also has developed a trust relation with those ones which accept or not his or her answer, depending on that trust relation, and to develop such a trust relation with an AI system is a completely different thing, because it's not dependent on one person and it's their expertise, but it's dependent on not only the expertise of the system, but also in all the societal and technical context in which this system has been developed. So I argue that they are not in a similar situation. So it's not really comparable in terms of what a person or a system can do. And how can we, the way we trust them is also different.
In the interest of time, I'll just second most of what Leo said.
Okay, thanks very much. So then,
thank you so much. My name is Ismail Nadimi, and I'm a professor of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I have been basically developing these algorithms for the last, I don't know, several years. So I would like to be the devil's advocate here, because otherwise, if we just, confirm each other, I think the discussion would be quite skewed. I think maybe one point that we could discuss is what we are achieving right now using AI and machine learning compared to what we have basically in practice for the last 20 years. And getting back to the presentation of Sune, for instance, when we sit down with our clinical colleagues and we want to start the project, the first question that comes up is from our side is, okay, what level of sensitivity or specificity or the NPV or the PPV, all these values, what are the thresholds that AI basically needs to beat, right? And then we get a certain list of requirements, and then we say that, okay, so keeping this in mind, we try to come up with an algorithm that surpasses what now is in practice. And for example, if you look at the hepatology, one of the techniques or one of the methods that classifies the patient as whether needs to go to check for liver fibrosis or cirrhosis is basically the ratio of two enzymes. Very inaccurate. Basically, tossing a coin would give the same results, right? So now we have an sort of machine learning based algorithm that could basically potentially tell us with a very high sensitivity, high specificity, actually with NPV of close to 98%, to classify these patients as basically either they need to go to be checked for fibrosis or cirrhosis or not. So comparing these two, I mean, my feeling is that when we put these new, let's say, neural networks or AI-based algorithms, and we try to compare them with their counterparts, those methods that have been used for the last 20 years, they are not getting the same treatment. Let's say the old ones, I don't really know what was the process of, approving just the ratio. And it has been, in practice, the results are not that good, versus something that we have basically proven with a limited number of patients that outperforms what is in practice nowadays. But suddenly everybody's interested to get some kind of explanation out of this. So it's like everybody's wondering whether this is too good to be true. So how can we basically surpass that? How can we, like from the AI side, we think that, okay, so we are using this algorithm is not going to face so much, let's say, objection from the clinical side or from the ethical side, and it can just be streamlined and then to be used in practice so that the patients could use it. Is there any way that we could handle this in the near future? So that's basically my question.
Should I go first?
You can.
Okay. So I'm not sure who the devil is the advocate for. I mean, I think I didn't put it in the presentation here, but when I wrote sort of a draft for this presentation, I started out with a scenario where you go to your doctor, supposed to screen you for diabetic retinopathy, and she tosses a coin. Now, given that's the procedure, I'd probably prefer any sort of AI system that could increase the accuracy, right? So I think my point here is not to, I think basically the sort of considerations that you are just telling about, what do you do when you develop a system for clinical purposes? Those considerations are the sort of things that justify the use of the system. They don't have to be final but just why is it a good idea to use the system compared to what we have already? And then of course you will have an exchange. Some people are just afraid of the new, some people are sentimental about the old, and clinicians have in some domains, I think, a very strong feeling that they know better because they see patients and they have experience and so on. So you also very quickly enter a whole debate between sort of clinical knowledge and experience versus sort of evidence-based or statistical systems like this. My point is not to advocate for being very skeptical about AI systems. Quite to the contrary, I think that the reason why these justificatory considerations are important is that they might actually make it easier to prevent misconceptions, unfounded skepticism, and so on. It might be very simple to justify why you use a system. It's just much, much better than what you have. in a very relevant respect, say accuracy. So I think that's my brief.
Yes.
I think,
Okay.
could
I just have a
Yeah.
comment on that? So very often one could think about that people are thinking that AI is kind of a person and that AI is not a measurement device. And that makes the kind of a confusion on here. Let me take a PCR test. I go to a doctor, I give my saliva sample, that goes to an automatic machine that automatically decides, you can actually automate the whole chain, decides that you have actually coronavirus or not. This is a kind of recommendation that is coming out, and then the doctor acts accordingly. So this is the process. And now you can think, are you a subject of automatic decision making now? The same is in retinopathy. You take an image, it goes to a machine, and the machine says that I detected retinopathy. So what's the difference between taking a measurement with a thermometer and trusting it? Now the question is really on the setting that we have a feeling that AI is more than a tool. It has a conscience. It's not. So it is just one of the tools that we use. And if using the tool saves people, exactly as in this case we are saying, we should use it. I'm pragmatic on that kind of a sense. I think that is an ethically correct choice, is to use the method that improves healthcare. And you just check that it happens. And I totally believe, Virginia, that there has to be a process to figure out that the system really improves the system and does not bring other problems with it. And one has to be kind of aware of this full system and for the full lifetime of the system that you created. Because you don't want to solidify the system to a knowledge of, let's say, of 2010, when the data was gathered, and have no development afterwards. Because people, when they do their work, they actually advance the science, because they become better. Machines don't, unless you feed them good data from people. So this is also a part how you put it up that is necessary in order to make that happen, but still a tool.
Okay, so I think I'll ask, I think there's two questioners that want to pose. Three. So could you all just post your questions, and then so we'll have time to hear all the questions, and then we can let the panelists.
Okay, thank you. I think I have to go back to my first comment about endpoints, because you told about the retinopathy algorithm. It was approved because it finds these early signs of retinopathy. What I would like to know is, does it prevent blindness, and how much overtreatment does it cause, and is the complications higher than the gains? This is exactly the same as Esma is talking about. And I have another example. There's just marketed a system called GI Genius, for crying out loud, which assists the colonoscopy. When he looks at the bowel wall, it will highlight pathology. But it does find only, of course, it adds only the pathology that is very diminutive, because the other ones would have been found by the endoscopist, of course. So what is the gain, and what is the negative consequences of that in terms of overtreatment and in terms of complications and costs, draining costs from other things? So the most important thing to me is to have valid endpoints that the patients define, and not these pseudo endpoints about polyp detection rate, about number of early retinopathy and stuff like that. Thank you.
So you want to answer now, or other questions? Fast answer that you are exactly right. So it's the total cost that matters. If you build a drug I was using this drug as an example, sorry, but if you build a drug that is hugely expensive that nobody can use it, what's the purpose? You have to figure out the full system. As I said, as Virginia is saying, it is not alone the AI system that is coming. When you decide when you deploy it or not, it depends on all the kind of the additional system that is around it. But we are humans, we actually can figure it out. I don't think that it's an impossible task. I think it's just a responsible task to do it. Referring to responsible AI that Virginia is promoting here.
And maybe if I may add, it's not only about when the costs are very high for the systems, but also looking at when the costs are very low. So if we are making diagnostics very, very low cost, then of course all of us have something wrong with us. No one is normal, let's say. So if you make the diagnostic costs very, very low, then you are going to increase the carrying the care and the medical costs much higher. So it's again measuring everything, not only when the AI costs are very high, but also when those are causing very low costs for checking, to doing the diagnostic, because probably at the end we end up with much higher costs in healthcare than what we have now, if everybody is going to be treated for some things which we don't know we have, and we would be happily staying with them forever if we wouldn't know that we had those pathologies.
Yes, so exactly. It's like building a motorway to a city that has no way of dealing with the traffic that is coming in.
Exactly, yeah. So it's the total cost, I fully agree.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to all our speakers, both in Umeå and here in Odense. And then we'll resume after lunch in an hour and have more conversations. So thanks very much.